Um, Jason, I wanted to give you the opportunity, since you did liturgist and children's moment, if you'd like to do the trifecta and deliver the message, I'm willing to let you have that. You're good? Okay. Thank you for doing both of those today. Well, this month is Laity Celebration Month, and we've intentionally wanted the service to look a little different this month by having the laity participate a little bit in delivering the message. And I'm excited today to go ahead and continue that effort with a different type of message, one that's going to be brought by a couple members of our congregation. Today we're going to focus on something powerful, and if you haven't figured it out yet from all the hints that we dropped throughout the morning, we'll be sharing our testimony. Now, when I say testimony, I'm not just talking about a polished speech or a perfectly told story. We mean the real, honest ways God has shown up in our lives, right in the middle of our mess, our questions, our great moments, and our heartbreaks. There's something amazing that happens when we share what God has done. Sharing our testimonies build faith for ourselves and for those around us. And they remind us that God is still working, He's still healing, still saving, and He's still speaking. In Revelation 12, chapter 12, verse 11, it says, "They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." That means our stories, they're not just stories, they're part of how God brings hope and victory into the world. So today you might hear a story that sounds a little bit like yours, or maybe completely different. Either way, I believe God wants to speak to your heart through it. And maybe, just maybe, He's nudging you to share your story too. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. As we begin this, let's take a moment to open our hearts. Let's ask God to make us brave, make us honest, and to remind us of His goodness. Because when we share what God has done, we're not just talking, we're declaring that He's alive and that He's active in our lives. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first one.
Good morning. I'm Alicia Haynes. You probably all know me, but I'm Alex's wife. I think that's how I got wrapped into being up here and being first. I am super nervous. I am not a public speaker, but when Alex asked me if I'd be willing to do this, I said no really fast because I do not like talking in front of people, but like Alex said, I got nudged a little bit, not by him, probably by the Holy Spirit, because I have a really awesome story to tell. And I always say this isn't my story. I just had like a front row seat to a real and true, undeniable miracle. So I love to tell this story. And every time I think about it or talk about it, it renews my faith and reminds me that God truly can do anything, because you'll probably hear me throughout this story say, like, this next part, this is not possible, it was impossible, and He made everything possible through this whole story. So I have been praying that I can hang in there and really share this story so that you all can hopefully have a little bit of renewed faith and remember this when things feel impossible. But so my story starts in December of 2012. I was about 9.5 months pregnant with Tessa, and we were living in El Dorado. I was working as a labor and delivery nurse at the hospital there. And one of my very good lifelong friends, Callie Jones, was also living about 7 miles outside of El Dorado. She was also pregnant and due about 2 weeks after me, but she was pregnant with twin girls, and so we got to share our pregnancy journey together, and that was really special for us. I had known her forever and taken care of. She had 2 older boys, Justin, who was 17 at the time, and Jacob was 12, and I cared for them when they were tiny, and so we've been like family to each other for a very long time. So it was special to us to share this pregnancy journey together. And because she was pregnant with twins, she was scheduled to have a C-section the week after Christmas. And for many reasons, one just being twin pregnancies don't deliver naturally very well. Her twin girls were also breech, meaning they were trying to come out the wrong way. So when we have a breech delivery twin or not, we'd like to deliver those C-section also. And the other remarkable thing about Callie was about 4 years before this, she was in a tragic car accident, and among many terrible injuries, her pelvis was completely crushed and had to be reconstructed. And because of that, it was impossible for her to deliver these babies naturally. So for many, many reasons, she needed to have a C-section at a high-risk hospital in Wesley. It needed to be very controlled for these babies. So Christmas Eve 2012, Callie texted me. I was on my way to my dad's house to share Christmas Eve with that side of the family. She texted me and she said, "I've been having some contractions today, and I think we're just going to go ahead and go up to Wesley and be monitored, see what's going on." And I said, "Oh my goodness, you could have Christmas babies." And she said, "It never even occurred to me, like these babies might be born on Christmas." And as much as I wanted, so that was the last I heard from her. And as much as I wanted to like keep texting her, did she get to the hospital? What's going on? Are they doing the C-section? I didn't, because as a labor and delivery nurse, I know those mamas need peace during that time. So I didn't bother her, just waiting impatiently to get the call that those babies were here. And I didn't hear from her that night. And what I didn't know was she stayed home for a little bit. Her contractions stopped. She felt fine, didn't have any more contractions. They stayed home and didn't go to the hospital. So very early Christmas morning, my phone's ringing. Alex and I were still in bed. My phone's ringing and it's Callie calling me. And I thought she was at the hospital. So I'm expecting to get a call that the babies were delivered, and we'll just rejoice in that. And I answered the phone, and it wasn't Callie, it was her oldest son, Justin. And I told you guys I've known Justin his whole life, and he grew up to be a quiet, calm, stoic cowboy. So Justin says, "Good morning, Alicia, how you doing this morning?" And I said, "Well, I'm good, Justin. Are your sisters here?" And all of a sudden his voice changed, and he said, "No, my mom needs you right now." And I'm like, "Well, are you at the hospital?" And he said, "No, we're at the house. You need to come right now. She needs you." And I hadn't realized when he made the phone call, he'd stepped outside to talk to me. And about that time, he walked back in the house, and all I could hear on the other side of the phone was screaming. And Callie was saying, "Justin, just ask her if I can push." And he said, "Alicia, one of the baby's foot is hanging out, and my mom needs to know if she can push." And I said, "No, tell her no." And I said, "Did you call 911? And he said, "Yes, the ambulance is on the way, but my mom wants you." And I was 25 years old, and I was a labor and delivery nurse, and as a night shift labor and delivery nurse, I had delivered babies by myself because we didn't have doctors there all the time. We had to call them in from their homes, and sometimes they didn't make it. But I was thinking, you don't need me. I can't do anything about this. You just need to go to the hospital. But Alex and I raced out to Callie's house, and it was one of the longest drives I've ever made in my life. The ambulance was behind us a few miles. She lived out in the country, so we could see them behind us on the highway. And we pulled into her long driveway. There was a fire truck there, and these two firefighters got on the scene before us. And we pulled up to her house, and her boys were sitting outside, and Jacob had his head in his hands crying. And I said, "Alex, check on those boys who are like my boys." And we ran in the house, and the first thing I saw was Callie was laying on the living room floor, clearly in labor. and there was a baby laying on the cold tile floor, and she was absolutely lifeless, gray. She wasn't moving, she wasn't breathing, and these firefighters were standing over her. And so I went to her and I said, "Does she have a pulse?" And they said, "We don't know." And I said, "Does somebody have a stethoscope?" I had nothing, I was still in my pajamas. And they said, "I don't know, I think maybe we have one on the truck." And I said, "Somebody go get me a stethoscope." Well, they had tied off and cut her cord exactly as they should have. And the thing about newborn babies is, shortly after their cord is cut, they will still have a pulse in their umbilical cord. So I grabbed that cord stump, and she had the strongest, most bounding pulse in that cord. And so I said, "She's got a pulse, but she was not breathing." And we had nothing. We didn't have, in the hospital, we would have put a bag mask on her, and we would have pumped air into her, and I had nothing. And I yelled at Alex to get some blankets or towels or something. We have to get this baby warm and off of this floor. There was snow on the ground. It was freezing in that house. And thank God, shortly after that, the paramedics ran in with all of their equipment. And I told them who I was. I'm a labor and delivery nurse. And I said, where do you want me to go? They said, "You go deliver that second baby," because they don't like to deliver babies. And they took the first baby and started working on her, but she never cried, she never breathed. So I went to Callie, and her babies were fraternal twins, so they each had their own amniotic sac. So the first baby was born, and I checked Callie, and the second baby's bag of water was still intact. So she was not coming right at this second. And I looked at the paramedics and I said, "We need to go to the hospital right now. Her water's still intact, we need to go." And they said, "We can't. It's their policy that if it's an imminent delivery, they have to stay on the scene and deliver that baby." And what I knew was, Callie's pelvis can't handle this, and this baby is breached, and I can't deliver this baby here by myself. And I kept telling them, "I can't. We have to go to the hospital. She can't be delivered this way." And they kept saying, "We can't go." And I looked at Alex and I said, "Call somebody and ask him to send somebody to help me." And he called the hospital and he said, "They're ready for you when you get there, but they're not coming." and in the meantime, while I'm begging these paramedics to please just get us, Callie's water broke with the second baby, and I still thought at the time, this baby is breached. I checked her and felt what I thought was a knee. It was actually an elbow coming out, and I just looked at these paramedics and I said, "If this baby comes any farther, she's gonna get stuck, and she's not gonna survive." And Andy, Callie's husband, was sitting up by her head, and he said, "Callie, we just have to pray." And she said, "That is all that I have been doing." And I remember thinking, good, I hadn't even thought of that. I'm just panicking, so that's good. They keep doing that. And I told the paramedics, she's gonna get stuck. If she's stuck, she's gonna die. And they finally said, "Okay, we can deliver this baby in the back of an ambulance as easy as we can right here." So they loaded us up, and I held that baby in because we cannot let her come any farther down the birth canal. And if any of you mamas out there delivered your babies without any pain medicine, you get to that point, you have absolutely no control. And again, it is impossible for you to not push. It is impossible for that baby to not try to come out. So I held that baby in, and we loaded up in the ambulance, and that whole time, the paramedics were still working on the first baby. They couldn't get a tube down her to help her breathe. She hadn't gotten any oxygen. She still wasn't breathing when we left. And so when we loaded up in the ambulance, I knew that we were leaving a dead baby back there, and we had to get her to the hospital because I cannot let both of these babies die here on Christmas morning, both of Callie's babies, because that first one is not going to be able to survive. So we race to the hospital in the ambulance, and that was the longest ride of my life. And the entire time, I just locked eyes with Callie and told her, you can't push. And I'd feel a contraction come, and that baby would press against my hand, and she would not push, which is impossible to do. And she just didn't. And luckily, I could feel that baby kind of wiggling against my hand, so I knew she was still alive because we didn't have anything to get heart tones or anything. I had no idea how that baby was doing. We got about 2 blocks from the hospital, and her umbilical cord slid out the birth canal into my hand. And that's one of the worst things that can happen in a delivery, is that cord coming out above the head. And we had trained for this as labor and delivery nurses because that's the baby's lifeline. And if it gets pressure on it, they have no blood, no oxygen, and that cannot last for very long. And so I knew I had to keep pressure off that cord too. So here I'm trying to keep this baby in. There's an appendage sticking out, and now I have a cord in my hand, and everything was just going from bad to worse. And I remember pulling into the hospital, and I looked at the ER nurse, and I said, I have her cord in my hand, and she said, okay. And they just put us on the elevator and sent us up the elevator to the OB floor. And as soon as those doors opened, one of our most senior labor and delivery nurses who helped train me was standing right there. Her name is Pam Lowmaster, and she is like cool, calm, collected, always knows what to do. And I looked at her and I said, Pam, I have a cord in my hand. And she said, it's okay. Do you have pressure off the cord? And I said, I think so. I need you to take it. And she said, no. You're okay, you got it, which is what we're supposed to do. If I have pressure off the cord, we don't move. I have to stay there, I'm stuck. And I'm like, somebody please, I can't do this anymore. I am 9 months pregnant, squatted on the back of a gurney, trying to hold another baby in. Somebody take this from my hands. And they kept saying, no, you've got it. And I thought, no, I don't. Nobody even understands that I can't do this anymore. And they wheeled us back into the delivery room, but she needed a C-section. We still all knew the baby can't come out this way, so we had to sit there and wait for the surgeon to get there. And one of the other doctors came who was not a surgeon, and I finally conveyed to her, like, you have to take this baby out of my hand, and thankfully she did, and she held that baby in while we're waiting for the surgeon. And what I didn't know was, as soon as we left in the ambulance, they got the first baby intubated and started oxygenating her. We met another ambulance coming down the driveway. That ambulance came, they loaded her up. They got to the hospital like 2 minutes after us. And one of the other nurses came in and said, baby number 1's in the nursery. And I was like, she's dead. I know that she is. And they said, pediatrician's working on her, she's intubated. And so I ran down there, and she was pink and beautiful, still intubated, doing fantastic. And it was the most unbelievable thing. I was taking pictures of her to run back to Callie and show her that that baby was alive for now. We have no idea. There's no way she was ever going to be completely normal because she was without oxygen for 20 minutes. Which is impossible again. But she was alive, and I ran back into the labor and delivery room, and the surgeon had just got there, and as soon as she walked in the room, baby number 2 straightened her arm out, stuck her hand out of the birth canal, and just came out. And the doctors took her and said, oh, I had no idea a baby could be born like that. That's kind of impossible. It's like, me neither. and she was completely fine, baby number 2, completely fine. And so I ran back to the nursery to check on baby number 1. And she, in those few minutes that her sister was born, she perked up so much that she was fighting against her tube. And she ended up, they took that out. She was breathing on her own completely. And both of those babies were okay. They sent the first baby to Wesley NICU, and Andy, the dad, went with him, and I stayed at the hospital with Callie, and he called and said, all these NICU nurses keep saying, we don't even know why this baby is here. Like, she's perfect. She's completely perfect. But we still wouldn't know for a while if that was true, because again, she did not have oxygen for a very long time. But I'll tell you, I wish I had a picture of them. Those girls will turn 13 on Christmas this year, and they are completely perfect. They are smart, they are kind, they are so talented little cowgirls. They are completely perfect. Nothing wrong with either one of them. And it is a true miracle, because there is none of those doctors and nurses that touched any part of this story, they will all tell you, for sure that first baby should not be alive. She should not have all of her brain faculties, and she's amazing. So I think we see miracles, little miracles every day if you pay attention, but that is just one of those. I mean, there's nothing like a Christmas morning undeniable miracle. So I'm glad I got to share that story with you.
Good morning. My name is Gail Whiteman, and Alex asked me last week if we wanted to do this, and I said, well, I'll think about it, call him during the week. Well, the week was pretty busy, and I didn't get him called, and unlike my wife, this isn't my comfort zone. And we got a story to tell you, and I can't say that I'm real happy what we did at that time, but I've prayed about it ever since, and this is the way it works. But we were invited to a wedding, and we thought, well, we'd go to the wedding. Everything was just fine. Went in there, and we sat down, and there was the preacher. There wasn't no preacher there. They somehow somebody can marry somebody, and we were sitting there listening to the wedding, and it was all pretty nice, but something bothered me because we never heard God mentioned in the wedding. It wasn't just that, and God should be in any wedding, and that's the way it should be. But anyway, we were sitting there, and they were getting their wedding, and everything was fine. And they had a DJ there, and he was wanting to have a dance for them, and everybody could come up there and dance. And they told us, they said, we danced, and the DJ, he got done with the dance, and he says, now we're going to find out people that are dancing here, whether they're going to, when they got married, and how many years they've been married. Well, it just so happened that there were seven. They had quite a few of them, but it happened to be that my wife and me were married the longest. I don't know if it's 40-some years, it's something like that, but and the DJ would sit there and he says, could you give these couple here some advice on how you got such a long marriage? And it kind of shocked me, and my wife, she was sitting there too, and we were sitting there going, it was it seemed like an hour, but it wasn't that. They says, I says, good luck. And I told myself, I says, we went back and sat down in the deal, and I says, why didn't I not tell him that put Jesus in your life first? God is the one that does it, and we didn't do that. And we went back, and I told my wife, I says, we're no better than Peter. Peter done the same thing. He And I've prayed about it ever since. It just hurt me that I didn't tell him about God. And yeah, if I would have just said, that God, if you put God in your life, it's going to be perfect. And we've regretted that, and I'm not proud to say that, but that's the way it works. I mean, I'll never do that again. Of course, Peter said that too, and that's just the way it is. And unlike Alicia, I'm not talking very much, but that's my story.
Good morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Dawn Hett, and I am the secretary here at Eastmore. I am very type A, and I plan on reading this piece of paper word for word without any deviations. I just want to start by saying how thankful I am for where God has me today, for my husband, our kids, our extended family, and this incredible church and community. I truly believe that all the events in my life have led to where I am today, and I am so grateful to be here. My family moved to Marion when I was 6, and I consider it home. I had the best childhood with loving, attentive parents who kept Christ at the center of our family. A lot of you probably remember, but when I was 10, my 16-year-old sister Allison was killed in a car accident. Losing her was obviously devastating, but my parents' faith never wavered, and that was such a powerful example for me. God really is good all the time. As I grew older, faith continued to be a foundation in my life. Like Molly said last week, going to church wasn't an option, and when I met Jason, it was obvious his faith was just as important to him. Over the years, I've had several moments where I've clearly seen God's hand at work. When I was 19, I was in a car accident outside of Peabody that totaled my car. Police told my parents and I that they assumed there was a fatality based off the scene, but I walked away without a scratch, and I know that was God's protection. Each of my pregnancies came with challenges, but after my youngest, Cooper, I faced something life-threatening, a postnatal hematoma from an arterial bleed. While strapped to the operating table waiting for the final CT results, my blood pressure dropped and I lost consciousness. In the moment, when I couldn't breathe and I truly thought this might be it, I felt an overwhelming peace. A peace that if I woke up in the recovery room or in the presence of Jesus, it would be okay. This didn't happen yesterday. I blame Alicia. I can't explain it, but I know it was from God. In the weeks that followed, I felt the love of God through our family, friends, and this community. I had heard people say before that they felt the power of prayer, and I thought, well, that's a nice sentiment, but what does it really mean? And for the first time in my life, I did truly feel the power of prayer. Most recently, our youngest Cooper was diagnosed with autism just before his 2nd birthday. And though it was a moment of uncertainty, it was also one of faith. We were reminded that God's plan is always greater than our own, and that He crafted Cooper exactly as He intended. Full of joy, curiosity, and a spirit that reflects His love in ways we could have never expected. Our walk as a family hasn't always been easy, but God has been faithful every step of the way. He continues to surround us with His love through this church and the people in our lives. And for that, I'm so thankful.
It's going to take me a second to collect myself. Thank you, Alicia and Gail and Donna, for having the courage to come up here. And there's no doubt in my mind that you touched people's lives today and gave us something to think about and to remember how fortunate we all are that Whether we like it or not, God is with us every day, whether we ask for it, whether we prayed for him or not. And if you'll just bow your heads in prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the opportunity to be here together, and we're grateful for the love that you have for us and the ways that you have touched all of our lives. And there is no doubt that you are real and that you are with us. And we're grateful to have the support and love of our church, and we ask that you help us to share your word with others. And we say these things in your name. Amen.